It wasn't scheduled. It wasn't planned. And yet, Lady Louise entered the East Gallery precisely 1 minute before it was too late. What she saw wasn't a simple accident or a routine reshuffling. It was a deliberate act. Camilla's staff, gloved and silent, were mid-removal of Catherine's official royal portrait. No explanation, no warning, just the quiet erasure of a future queen. The look on their faces when they saw Louise, priceless. And the consequences, immediate. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. It was a corridor most people ignored silent, tucked between heritage and dust, and filled with the faces of history that rarely shifted. The East Gallery had always been a place of reverence, where portraits stood still through decades of turmoil. But on that day, as the footsteps of Lady Louise echoed quietly against the marble, something felt wrong. The air held a different weight, one that raised the hairs on the back of her neck. She was only there because of a forgotten book left during a quiet stroll with her grandmother's former lady-in-waiting. She wasn't meant to return, but fate doesn't always follow palace protocol. What met her eyes at the far end of the hall forced her to stop mid-stride. 2 men, in pristine but unfamiliar uniforms, silent, mechanical, stood beside Catherine's portrait. The frame, recently restored and personally approved by the late Queen herself, had been unhooked. A thick sheet of bubble wrap lay beneath it like a burial cloth, ready to entomb what was never supposed to be touched. Louise's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't just that the portrait was being moved, it was how. There was no gallery logbook open, no preservation team badge, no archivist tagging the piece for documentation. This wasn't procedure. This was something else. She didn't speak at first. Neither did they. The moment hung in suspension, fragile as glass. Then one of the men turned, startled not with guilt, but with the rigid panic of someone caught mid-command. He stammered, fumbling for an explanation, calling it routine conservation, though no such task had been announced. The other offered a more rehearsed lie, claiming there had been a request from upper offices to re-evaluate lighting in that section. Louise, with her Windsor blood and her late grandmother's fire, wasn't convinced. Her silence now twisted into cold suspicion. The portrait, captured in warm, regal tones, depicted Catherine during her first year as Princess of Wales. It had become more than a painting. It was a symbol, an anchor for a public that had seen her evolve under relentless scrutiny and pressure. To see it removed in secret, with such indifference, felt like a betrayal. Louise's confusion began to swell into something else, fury. She asked for their supervisor. They hesitated. She asked for the paperwork. None appeared. And when she demanded they stop, their eyes flickered not with authority, but with doubt. They hadn't expected her. Lady Louise had never wielded palace influence for personal gain, but something about this moment snapped the quiet lineage she'd always respected. She knew this wasn't just about art or logistics. This was political, intentional. A message aimed not at her, but at Catherine, and the timing couldn't be coincidental. Without another word, she turned and walked away, but her expression had changed. No longer the young royal learning her place. Now the silent sentinel who had caught something the others had tried to hide. But Lady Louise wouldn't stay silent, and as she stepped away from the scene, a quiet war was already beginning to erupt behind the palace walls. This wasn't the first portrait removed from the gallery, but it was the first that mattered. Sources say Camilla had been orchestrating subtle changes in royal visual protocol for months. But Catherine's image? That was sacred ground. To remove it now, without approval or explanation, sent a coded message, one that Catherine and the entire House of Windsor could no longer ignore. Behind the marbled silence of the palace walls, a quiet restructuring had been taking place, one not of titles or lineage, but of optics. Since being crowned queen consort, Camilla had slowly but deliberately begun reconfiguring how the monarchy appeared, not only to the world but to itself. Gone were the more emotive images of Diana from the main corridors, tucked away into rotational storage that curiously never seemed to rotate back. Gone too were certain softer moments of Charles and Catherine from their early public engagements, replaced by curated images of formality, distance, and regal composure. The change was gradual enough to be dismissed as modernization, but those watching closely knew better. This was a subtle, strategic reclamation of space and erasure of anything that didn't align with the new image Camilla sought to project. Portraits had always been more than decor. They were declarations of presence, of favor, of dominance. Within the monarchy, where words are measured and silence is weaponized, a portrait's placement speaks volumes. And Catherine's, hanging in one of the most revered sections of the East Gallery, was more than symbolic. It was testament to a woman who had risen from public scrutiny to royal centerpiece. Her image didn't just represent a duchess or a princess, it embodied the future of the crown, the public's trust, and the seamless continuity between Queen Elizabeth and the next generation. To unhook it without ceremony, to whisk it away under cover of excuse, was to send a calculated message that her rise was not inevitable and her presence was not untouchable. Palace insiders, under strict anonymity, revealed that Camilla had given repeated instructions to streamline the visuals, a phrase so vague it could mean anything and had. Curators were quietly pressed to rotate outdated icons and instead feature more representative hierarchies, coded language that conveniently elevated certain figures while pushing others into obscurity. But Catherine wasn't just another portrait. She was the image most visitors paused before, the one that made headlines when first unveiled, the one Queen Elizabeth herself had personally requested be framed in Windsor's archival standard, and Camilla's staff had dared to tamper with it. What made this bolder still was the lack of any known directive from King Charles. Whispers swirled that he hadn't been told of the portrait's removal and that his aides were scrambling to confirm whether it had been authorized at all. If true, this wasn't just a protocol breach, it was an assertion of unchecked influence. A reminder that Camilla's hand was now firmly on the gallery, and by extension, on how the crown was visually remembered. But what drove such a bold move? Some believe it was fear of Catherine's rising global profile, of her approval ratings eclipsing even Charles's in some circles. With every engagement, every speech, every photograph, Catherine wasn't just fulfilling royal duties, she was becoming a symbol. One that could quietly overshadow a queen consort still battling for full public acceptance. And while Camilla may have hoped the act would go unnoticed, she underestimated one thing: Lady Louise was already talking. She didn't hesitate. Within the hour, Lady Louise requested an audience with the king, not as a teenager tattling on staff, but as the granddaughter of the late queen, acting on instinct. What she told Charles stopped him mid-breath, and his reaction, not what Camilla expected, because Charles knew exactly what that portrait represented. Louise had never wielded her position as leverage, never played the games that defined the palace's quiet wars. But this wasn't about preference, it was about legacy. She bypassed the usual channels: no scheduling through secretaries, no quiet words passed to equerries. She made it clear she needed to speak with the king, and it could not wait. Her determination, so rarely expressed, caught attention. Within the hour, she was ushered into his private study, a place heavy with memory, where Queen Elizabeth once held court with silence more powerful than decree. What began as a factual account quickly turned into something else. Louise, usually composed, let emotion rise to the surface. She described the staff's deliberate movements, the lack of documentation, the stifled panic in their eyes when they saw her. But it was when she said the words "Catherine's portrait" that everything changed. Charles's face reportedly fell, not in confusion, but in recognition. He knew precisely which portrait she meant. He had stood before it with Elizabeth, heard his mother's rare, quiet endorsement: "She'll steady this family in ways we won't realize until I'm gone." That image wasn't just a canvas, it was a confirmation of continuity. And now, it had been removed. A silence settled between them as Louise pressed on, her voice steadier than her years. She reminded Charles of the Queen's reverend, CE for symbolism, of how nothing in Windsor was ever done without purpose. She questioned the intent behind the erasure, subtly pointing out that neither timing nor method aligned with protocol. But her most piercing blow came last. She didn't raise her voice or accuse. She simply asked, "Is this what the Queen would have wanted?" And for a moment the king wasn't king, He was a son haunted by the weight of his mother's shadow and the widening fracture between duty and desire. His thoughts tangled, his loyalty to Camilla, who had waited decades to be accepted, his understanding of Catherine's symbolic role, beloved by a public starving for grace. And now, Louise, who had never once brought palace drama to his doorstep, standing before him with a truth too sharp to ignore. He looked down at his hands, then back at her. No answer, not yet, because he knew that acknowledging the portrait's removal as anything other than a mistake would ignite something far larger than a domestic disagreement. It would crack open a question he had spent years avoiding: who really defines the future of the monarchy? But before Charles could act, Camilla had already launched damage control with chilling efficiency. Within hours, palace PR machines were in motion. A leaked memo cited restoration protocols. Another claimed the gallery was under reorganization. But those close to the crown knew better. This wasn't about frames or dust. It was about dominance. And Camilla's team wasn't just protecting her reputation. They were rewriting history in real time. The timing was no coincidence, with whispers already circulating through royal circles about the incident in the East Gallery. Camilla's pre-SS office acted swiftly, mechanically even. Carefully worded memos were distributed internally and accidentally slipped to favored media contacts. They painted the portrait's removal as part of a long-planned conservation effort. Nothing sinister, nothing deliberate, just another day at the palace, where history and preservation dance hand in hand. But anyone who's followed the monarchy long enough knows there are no accidental leaks, only strategic ones. Camilla's private secretary, a woman known for her precise and often ruthless control over information flow, made discreet calls to several editors and royal correspondents. They were given just enough to report. Without digging deeper, the gallery was undergoing seasonal visual alignment. It sounded official. It sounded boring. It sounded safe. And that's exactly what Camilla needed: narrative sedation before curiosity could turn into scandal. The removal of Catherine's portrait, once a potential powder keg, was repackaged as a dull procedural necessity. But cracks were already forming beneath the surface. Several royal insiders, some still loyal to the Queen's vision, noted something far more telling: the portrait's removal came mere days before Catherine was set to represent the monarchy at a high-profile international summit. A coincidence? Unlikely. Optics are everything in the royal game, and to remove the image of a future queen just as she prepares to stand on the world stage sent a chilling signal. Catherine wasn't being sidelined by accident. She was being neutralized quietly, professionally, and with surgical precision. At the Royal Archives, staff were suddenly told to hold off on any official comment, readying the gallery's display history. One archivist, speaking under anonymity, confessed that a prepared statement had been approved only to be abruptly retracted minutes before its scheduled release. No explanation given, no new version issued. Silence, it seemed, had been ordered from the top. The kind of silence that doesn't just suggest caution, it implies threat. And then came the most damning whisper of all. A source close to Camilla's team referred to Catherine, not by name, but as the distraction. The implication was as sharp as it was cold. Catherine's rising prominence was becoming inconvenient, her presence too magnetic, her symbolism too powerful. In an institution built on image, her very likeness had become a liability to those trying to control the present narrative. So it was removed, not debated, not explained, but removed. And in its place, a sterile vacuum where legacy once stood. But for Catherine, this wasn't just strategy, it was personal. And she was done staying quiet. Behind closed doors, Catherine entered the king's private study not with rage but with resolve. For years she had played the role asked of her, diplomatic, loyal, silent. But now her portrait was gone. Her image, her presence being erased. What began as loyalty was turning into resistance. And Charles wasn't prepared for what she would say next. She walked in with the quiet authority of someone who no longer needed permission to speak. There was no storm in her voice, no raised volume or visible fury, but the weight in her words, the precision of her tone, cut deeper than any outburst ever could. Catherine had been the monarchy's most stabilizing figure in the chaos that followed the Queen's passing, and she reminded Charles of that not as a boast, but as a reminder of everything she had borne in silence. Through scandals, through shifting tides, through years of public scrutiny, she had stood firm. Not for herself, but for the institution, for the future, for him. Now she stood before her father-in-law, not seeking answers but demanding clarity. She asked the question he'd been avoiding since Lady Louise first spoke to him. Why her? Why now? What message was the palace sending by removing the very image that had become a bridge between tradition and modernity? Charles, seated behind the Queen's old desk, had no prepared reply, because deep down, he knew this wasn't about space in a gallery or dust on a frame. It was about power. And the moment he saw Catherine standing there, calm, commanding, unflinching, he realized just how much of it she held. She spoke of legacy, not just hers, but the monarchy's. She reminded Charles of the Queen's words, how Elizabeth had once called Catherine the anchor for the next reign. She didn't have to say what was already clear. Camilla was rewriting history, and Charles was letting it happen. Her voice softened only once when she spoke of her children. "If I'm being erased," she said, "what happens to them next?" It wasn't a plea. It was a warning. A mother defending not just a crown, but a lineage. The implication hung in the air. To diminish her was to jeopardize the future of George, Charlotte, and Louis. Charles sat in silence, weighed down by the impossible contradiction between his role as king and his devotion as a husband. He had fought so long and so hard for Camilla to be accepted. But in doing so, had he knowingly allowed the very future of the monarchy to be compromised? Catherine didn't offer him an ultimatum outright, but the undertone was unmistakable. This wasn't just about a portrait. It was about whether the institution still valued loyalty, service, and stability, or whether it would allow personal ambition to dictate its public face. And as Catherine turned to leave, she gave him one last look, not bitter, but resolute. She had said what needed to be said. The rest, now, was up to him. But just as Catherine left the room, thinking the message had landed, Camilla made her next move, and this time it was far more public. 2 days later, the gallery lights flickered and went dark. A minor electrical fire, the official statement read. But whispers inside the palace tell a more chilling story. The only section affected, the wall where Catherine's portrait had once hung. Coincidence, or something far more orchestrated? One thing was clear: this wasn't over. The East Gallery had stood untouched for decades, a sanctuary of royal continuity. Until now. The official report was clinical, almost dismissive, a brief disruption due to an electrical short in a rarely visited wing. But those inside the palace, who had long memorized every corridor, every lighting fixture, every maintenance log, knew something didn't add up. There had been no scheduled electrical checks, no prior concerns logged with operations, no rain, no storms, no power surges in the area. Yet suddenly, in the dead of night, the lights shorted, smoke filled the upper alcove, and alarms were triggered in only one section, the same section from which Catherine's portrait had just been removed. The same wall, now blackened, that once carried the symbol of a future monarch. Emergency responders arrived within minutes, but the damage was done. Though no flames were visible, the fire alarm system had activated due to what was later referred to as smouldering residue in the wiring. No other room, not even adjacent ones, had been affected. Just one precise panel of gallery walling. And when technicians attempted to review security footage to trace the source, another anomaly emerged. The footage was corrupted. A perfect blackout. Files from that hour were not just missing but overwritten. The system, according to IT logs, had reset itself at the exact moment the outage occurred. Internal staff, when questioned quietly by trusted aides, confirmed this had never happened before. Speculation ignited faster than the supposed fire. Was this truly a freak technical error? Or was someone trying to destroy evidence, send a message, or erase something that could no longer be hidden? Several curators noted that the only other paintings with damage were those recently repositioned under Camilla's visual strategy initiative. Coincidence continued to stretch thin. And then came a quiet revelation that turned suspicion into alarm. Camilla had been seen entering the gallery the night before. No escort, no official purpose, just a brief, undocumented stroll through the halls she had recently claimed as her domain. It wasn't illegal, but it wasn't protocol either, and in the context of what followed, it raised far more questions than it answered. There was no investigation, no press release offering transparency. The palace moved swiftly to repaint the wall and rewire the lighting, wrapping the incident in the same kind of silence that had swallowed Catherine's portrait. But not everyone accepted the story at face value, not Lady Louise. What others dismissed as a minor incident, she saw as a cover-up. And this time, she wasn't walking into the unknown. She was already watching, already digging, already listening for the next crack in the wall of silence they'd tried so hard to preserve. And while the palace tried to bury the smoke, Lady Louise was just getting started with proof the palace couldn't ignore. She didn't want to be involved, but she knew she had to act. A private staff member loyal to the late Queen passed Louise a copy of the hallway's original security tape before it was wiped. What it revealed shattered every excuse Camilla's camp had crafted. And once Charles watched it, everything changed. For days, Lady Louise had remained on the periphery, silently observing the palace scramble to contain what they could no longer deny. Rumors of sabotage lingered like smoke in the corridors, but proof remained elusive until a quiet knock at her door changed everything. The man who stood there was no stranger. He had once served under Queen Elizabeth, working closely within the palace's internal security division. A relic of the old guard, fiercely loyal and quietly watching the new order with growing unease. In his hand, a simple USB drive. What he handed her wasn't gossip or speculation, it was a time-stamped recording from the exact night the portrait had been removed, a file that had supposedly been erased. But someone had made a backup, and now that someone wanted the truth seen. The footage was damning. It showed Camilla's staff entering the gallery after hours, far outside their standard remit. They were alone. No curator, no supervisor, no documentation present. One staffer kept glancing toward the security camera, then tilted it just slightly, a motion mirrored in the corrupted file later submitted as the official record. The audio, though faint, caught the whispered urgency in their voices. One of them muttered, "We have to move before anyone notices." Another replied, "She wants it down tonight. No delays." There was no conservation team, no emergency alert, no gallery reshuffle, just orders carried out in secrecy and fear. Louise sat with the knowledge burning in her hands for barely an hour before deciding what had to be done. She didn't go to an aide or leak it to the press. She went to the one person who could no longer afford to look away. She requested an audience with King Charles again, this time in the Queen's old sitting room, a space filled with memory and consequence. He didn't question her urgency. Not after the last conversation. Charles watched the footage in silence. As the minutes passed, his grip on the armrest reportedly tightened. His jaw clenched, and when the final frame faded to black, he said nothing. But something inside him had changed. Because this wasn't an error, it wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a betrayal, one carried out by those who operated under his authority, using his name, hiding behind the veil of palace discretion. The weight of that reality sat heavy on his shoulders, cracking the wall of indifference he had built to protect his private loyalties. For Lady Louise, it was never about vengeance, it was about truth. She hadn't chosen this fight, but once pulled in, she refused to walk away. The evidence had spoken louder than whispers, louder than strategy, louder than spin. And with the king now staring at undeniable proof, a decision had to be made not just about a portrait, but about the very soul of the institution. With the evidence now undeniable, Charles faced a choice that would either heal the fracture or deepen the wound beyond repair. He summoned no aides, signed no public decree. But at precisely 12:04 a.m., King Charles gave an order that hadn't been spoken since his mother's reign: restore it. And just like that, Catherine's portrait was reinstalled under tight security this time, with one added detail that stunned everyone who saw it. The palace was asleep when the decision was made, or so it seemed. But inside the king's private quarters, the lights burned long past midnight. Charles sat alone, burdened by the revelations of the past days, the deception, the secrecy, the fractures within his own household. The footage had played over and over in his mind, each frame eroding the foundation of trust he thought he had built. He remembered his mother's fierce insistence on symbolism, how she understood that within the monarchy, every gesture carried weight, and how she never allowed personal emotion to cloud public duty. For the first time since her passing, Charles felt the full gravity of that legacy press against him, and in that moment, he knew neutrality was no longer an option. He bypassed Camilla's entire team. No consultation, no warning, only one person was summoned, the royal curator, the same man who had worked under Elizabeth and who had personally supervised the original installation of Catherine's portrait. He was awoken by a call marked urgent, and within the hour he stood face to face with the king, who issued the command without elaboration. "It goes back up," Charles said, "but not where it was. Higher, centered." The curator nodded, understanding without needing further explanation. It wasn't just a reversal, it was a declaration. By sunrise, the portrait had returned, but now it hung in a place of unprecedented prominence directly above the central arch of the East Gallery, guarded, lit, untouchable. And below it, a new plaque, freshly etched and glinting in the light, the future sovereign's steadfast voice. The words weren't ceremonial, they were personal, a line chosen by the king himself. And to those who read between them, it was unmistakable. Catherine had been silenced once. She would not be silenced again. The impact was immediate. Camilla's inner circle awoke to a palace transformed. No briefings had been sent, no statements issued, yet the message was clearer than any press release. Catherine's removal had been more than a misstep, it had been a challenge to the monarchy's future, and Charles, in restoring her image, had restored something else too, the balance of power. The move sent tremors through those who had sought to control the narrative, because in one quiet order, the king had shifted the tide and made it known where his allegiance truly lay. But just when it seemed like the storm had passed, an anonymous letter arrived on Lady Louise's desk, and its contents threatened to reignite the fire. Unmarked, no return address, sealed in wax. The letter was addressed to Lady Louise in handwriting she recognized but hadn't seen in years. Its contents? A revelation about what really happened to another portrait removed years ago, and who gave the original order. If what it claims is true, this wasn't Camilla's plan alone, and the royal fallout is only beginning. It arrived in the early morning hours, delivered not through official palace channels, but by a private courier bearing no credentials. The envelope bore no crest, no signature, only Louise's name written in a hand that sent a chill down her spine. It was familiar, unmistakably so, yet one she hadn't encountered since her early childhood. A script once attached to whispers behind closed doors, letters tucked away in drawers, and names that had quietly disappeared from royal relevance. When she broke the seal, the air seemed to shift. What she read inside was not accusation, it was confession. The letter opened with a memory, the removal of Princess Diana's final official portrait, just weeks before Charles's remarriage to Camilla. It had been quietly taken down from the West Wing gallery, cited for renovation, and never returned. No questions were asked publicly, no outrage followed. But within the folds of the monarchy, it had been noticed, and now, decades later, the letter claimed to reveal why. The author wrote of an emergency meeting, hastily called in the months leading up to the wedding. A decision was made, not to erase Diana's legacy outright, but to neutralize it, to prevent comparisons, to bury a visual reminder of a woman whose presence still haunted the crown. And more disturbingly, the letter implied that Charles himself had signed off on the removal not with malice, but under pressure from courtiers, who saw no other way forward. But the most damning line came midway through. A simple sentence written without embellishment: "This isn't Camilla's first removal, nor was it her decision alone." The letter never fully named the writer, but the closing line sent shivers through Louise's entire body. History doesn't erase itself. Someone always holds the brush. It was both a warning and a torch passed quietly to someone now seen as the only one willing to hold it. Louise folded the letter with trembling fingers. She had believed she was dealing with a recent betrayal, What she now understood was far worse. This had been happening for years. Camilla was not the architect, only the latest executor. The decisions were embedded deeper, older, and more entrenched than she had dared to imagine. She rose from her chair, the letter still clutched in her hand, and for the first time, she didn't feel like a granddaughter avenging a slight. She felt like a witness, one now pulled into a legacy of secrets designed not to be discovered, but to be inherited. The gallery battle had been a spark, but this was the fire. And as whispers echo through the royal halls once again, one thing is certain: the portrait war is only the beginning. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.